Hello and welcome to another episode of Team English Talks, and today we're going to be talking about A Christmas Carol, that fantastic, well-loved Dickens novel which we teach the whole year round, not just at Christmas. It's like a dog, it's not just for Christmas, it's for the whole year round apparently. So anyway, with me today I've got Mr. Steele.
Hello.
Miss Dodd.
Hi.
And Mr. Buff.
Hi.
And so let's kick off with why do we teach A Christmas Carol? Mr. Steele.
Well, past podcast episodes would dictate that now is the time I go, but it's A Christmas Carol, isn't it? And I was actually thinking I don't actually know what else to say other than it's A Christmas Carol, isn't it? Because it is the Christmas story, like the quintessential Christmas story. Aside from the nativity, obviously, we'll say that, we're in a Christian school. Aside from the nativity, it is the quintessential Christmas story. Better than The Grinch, better than anything else that's ever been written in terms of a Christmas story. Okay. It's fantastic. And selfishly, for me, I enjoy that sort of run up to Christmas where I can turn off half the lights in my classroom, get a fake fire on my board, and read A Christmas Story and get into the Christmas spirit. I love it.
And it's a ghost story as well. I think we forget, don't we, that it's supernatural, and we all love a bit of ghosts and redemption and people learning the errors of their ways, and and we all love a bit of a moralistic story. I mean, we teach enough of them, don't we? In spectacles and everything.
And we can all sympathise with Scrooge, I think, at all areas of the book.
I mean, I don't know enough to sympathise with Scrooge.
Warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. I'm like, yeah, I get it, Scrooge.
Yeah.
Nobody wants anybody near them.
I think that one of the reasons why we enjoy A Christmas Carol so much is because there's so much in the text that we can connect with, that we can associate with our Christmases, with that fondness around the time. So even if you take away the religious element of it, we all recognise going to a market around Christmas time and smelling different, chestnuts cooking.
I love the smell of Christmas.
You're going to your Christmas markets, more so recently where there's been an upsurge in the German Christmas markets, where you've got that feel of going out Christmas shopping on those cold Christmas nights where you can see your air, your breath in the air, and you're out wrapped up warm and you're enjoying yourself and people are having fun and just loving the fact that it's Christmas. And I think as a child as an adult you hang on to those childhood memories, and it's those traditions, isn't it, that you just really can still relate to. It's romantic. Yeah,
and Dickens loves a description of a street, doesn't he, at Christmas?
Oh, absolutely.
4 pages worth at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
The grocers and the butchers and the poulterers.
Well, because they were paid per letter rather than for, if they said they were writing a text, the more words you used, the more you got paid. Sorry, not per letter, per word. So they would, why use 5 words when you can get paid for 30?
So I think it's quite apt as well, because we have this sort of sense of when it comes up to Christmas, we do remember other people, don't we? We're more likely to give to charity. Yeah. And it's that sort of sense that the Dickens wants us to sort of remember it the whole year round. So we do remember it the whole year round by making Year 11 sit a GCSE.
And that goes well after
on
Christmas.
A Christmas Carol. So you're very welcome, Dickens.
Yeah.
We've done that one for you.
It's always great when you get after Christmas and year 10 are like, what, we're still doing this book? It's like, yes, and you'll be doing it until the end of year 11.
Yes. But Christmas is over, yes, but the Christmas spirit remains. And so does your exam. So there we go.
Hang on, I've not said my bit yet.
Oh, go on.
Honestly.
Right. That's not very spirited.
Not
very spirited, is it?
I know. So, I think on a very sort of basic level, another reason that it's a good one to teach is because people have seen the film.
Yeah.
A lot of students come to A Christmas Carol having already seen it on television at Christmas and having a basic awareness of the characters and the plot. And in some ways, that's really good because it means you don't have to do a huge amount of groundwork to set up the story. Yeah. But in other ways, it can backfire because you end up reading essays saying things like, that bit where, Miss Piggy dumps Kermit.
Oh,
and,
Yeah.
well, not.
And
Jacob and
honestly,
Robert Marley.
Oh, yeah,
No,
absolutely.
I would
but-
accept that in an essay. I love the Muppets version. If
So-
you want to watch it, go
No, but
ahead.
there was,
Please,
there was one answer where it said something like, "Oh, what about that bit where Scrooge gets really wet and slides down a tube?" And I was like, "What adaptation was that in?"
Yeah, so please just disregard anything that the English department have just said. No, I'm only joking. We all have our own favourites. My personal favourite is actually the cartoon version with Jim Carrey because it is so true to the text
It's
in
quite
terms
faithful,
of
isn't
the
it?
speech.
Yeah.
It's very, very
Apart
similar.
from the bit where he goes really tiny.
Where he's really tiny and old Joe shot.
But in terms of the...
Oh, is that the tube bit?
He goes through the
Yeah,
tube.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
sewer
It's
actually,
a
and he's
sewer,
like
yeah.
there's loads of excrement and stuff.
Oh,
It's-
right.
Yeah.
But
Right.
within the, if you're thinking about the language and the structure of it, it's very true to the text, and I do like it as well because I think I think it embodies and romanticizes it just in that perfect way.
It is,
I love
like,
how at the beginning
when the
we've got the
when the
context
camera's
of
flying
Lord
through the
London
streets,
flying
you
through
can
the
really
streets,
hear
yeah.
like
Yeah,
Dickens
you
describing
can,
the streets. It captures
absolutely,
that Christmas spirit, doesn't it?
absolutely. And I think as well, it somehow demystifies some of the language as well. So, for instance, at the beginning, when there's a description of Scrooge being such a skinflint, it's hard for them to imagine how tight it was realistically, as a character. However, when they see in the film him picking the pennies off the eyes of Jacob Marley's corpse, and that was actually not that they picked the pennies off the eyes, but that was actually something that was practiced in the Victorian times. So if a person was concerned or their family were concerned that they weren't going to be able to get into heaven, they would put pennies over their eyes so they could pay for their passage into heaven. So it was that idea that he's definitely going to be concerned that he's not getting into heaven because of his behaviour, but also it links in with that, that idea of this is how tight he is, that, he's taking the money back and he doesn't really care if he gets his passage into heaven, which then we wonder is it because Scrooge did that he's still floating around in purgatory?
Does he say
He
that?
didn't
That he
have the
removes the
money.
pennies from
No,
It doesn't in the book,
that's
no.
not in the
No,
book.
it's
That's
implied
in
how
the
tight he
film.
is. It's implied by how tight he is.
Oh,
but I
Mrs.
love that they've used
I
that
see,
because
yeah.
it allows
Yeah.
our students to understand just what kind of character Scrooge is.
Yeah.
See, I'm Team Muppets all the way through. I grew up with
Muppets, yeah, the
I just think Michael Caine is the best Scrooge, and the fact that you've got Gonzo and you've got Rizzo actually narrating it as well, and he
Yeah.
talks about it. He says, "I'm narrators
Yeah.
are omniscient. I know everything."
That's so.
And
I think that's something that we quite often we try and hammer home, don't we, in teaching that remember that Dickens is almost a character in his own novel because he
yeah.
takes on that
Yeah.
narrative role and
Yeah.
he gives his opinion on
Yeah.
many characters at different
Tells us what to
times.
think,
In
doesn't it?
many problematic ways,
Well,
but we might get onto that later.
Well, obviously Dickens wrote this story sort of on the assumption it would be read at Christmas, probably around a fire, to young people as, kind of a fable, a moral tale. And that's, I suppose that's why it's written in that sort of storybook kind of voice, isn't it? Because his intention was for it to be read aloud.
Well, he did read it aloud. He did shows. So he did shows where he toured up and down the country. He came to Bradford to St George's Hall. That was one of his earlier ones where
Yes,
he
I've
actually
heard
stood
that,
and
yeah.
read the story to an audience. And you're right, it's that idea. I think when you're delivering it in that way, it's so much more powerful.
Yeah.
It's almost like far more than if
It-
your reader is reading it.
it polemicizes it a lot more, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It is a polemic. It was
Yeah.
written as a polemic, and when you take note of that
Yeah.
narrator,
Yeah.
it becomes so much more obvious that he is effectively lecturing you on how
How you
things
should
should
be
change and how you
behaving.
should behave. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and him taking that active narrator role
Yeah.
is really, really important.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, we seem to like these texts where we just get told how to behave. We get lectured on
Yeah,
our
yeah.
morality
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
Which has its benefits and drawbacks, though, doesn't it? Because
yeah.
quite often I have marked essays in the past where Scrooge is described as a capitalist, or
Yeah.
Dickens
Yeah.
had more socialist views, and it's like, well, those terms weren't used until the very early 1900s.
Yes.
So that wouldn't be a thing that we'd want
There's
to
a
talk about here.
complete
So
misconception,
there's that sort
isn't
of
there?
crossover,
Yeah.
isn't there, with
Yeah.
Inspector Calls
This-
there.
Socialism as a movement wasn't really a thing in Britain
No.
during the time that Christmas Carol was
No.
written.
No.
You had your Conservatives and you had your Whigs, your Tories and your Whigs, and they basically were
Yeah.
much of the same.
The
you
poor
know,
were the poor, they didn't have the
yeah,
education
yeah,
or the motivation
absolutely.
to do anything
Yeah,
about that.
But there's many misconceptions around Dickens and around the Victorian era. I think they forget that this was written in the middle Victorian era, but actually this was at a time where even the railways were still in their infancy. You know, it was all very much an early Victorian. We forget that it was early Victorian, mid-century.
Yeah.
And a lot changed in those last 40 years of the Victorian or the century.
Yeah.
It was a massive change, so there was a lot going on, and they often confuse the Industrial Revolution with the Industrial Revolution that they're seeing in the early 1900s or just late 1900s. And actually, the second wave of Industrial Revolution that came along at that time was an emerging Industrial Revolution, but things were happening extremely quickly when this was written. So there's a lot of misconceptions around that, but that's up to us to make sure that they're kind of addressed.
I suppose you get the same kind of wariness about industry that you get in something like Blake's London in the poetry anthology, don't you? That sort of, you know, suddenly what was green and what was you know, what was quite sort of seen as an idyllic lifestyle is taken over, and the landscape changes. You know, the people are sort of forced into unnatural kind of work, you know, children up the chimneys and down the lines, that kind of thing.
It's that like engraving of Gin Lane, you know, the famous one. I always use that with teaching A Christmas Carol and teaching Blake's London, and it's like you got
so
such
powerful.
It really sort of captures that sort of essence of poverty in Victorian London, doesn't it?
And the lack of morals as well, isn't it? And the attitudes towards the poor. So we're going to move on to context. What contexts do we think, what would we suggest to students in terms of what's important in A Christmas Carol?
I think we have to take into account Dickens's personal context. You know, he was from a fairly middle-class family. You know, he was reasonably educated in a way that most people weren't in those days. And, you know, his father went to debtor's prison. He and his siblings and his mother ended up in a workhouse. And he got to see how poor people lived and how poor people acted. And I think he'd possibly, if you look at his other writings, been a little bit judgmental. And I think in that way that middle class people can be judgmental of the poor. And I think sort of being in that workhouse gave him a whole different perspective on society.
Yes, I was listening to a podcast the other day actually, and it was completely accidental, but it was actually discussing Dickens, and basically it was saying how he was having to fund for his parents. His father was in debtor's prison. He was having to pay for the keep of his mum and sisters who were in the workhouse, and every day he had to cross over to the other side of London effectively to go and work in this blacking factory. And in order for him to get back to the workhouse, he was going through some of the most horrific areas where there were people drunk on the streets, fighting in the streets. They were having sex in the streets. There was prostitution happening in front of everybody's eyes. There was people who were living in abject poverty, and it's the street that he's describing in A Christmas Carol effectively. And as an 11-year-old boy, which he was at the time, that must have had a profound impact on his view on poverty. And he must have been fearful, because what he's seeing there is, if I don't go to work and get this money, this is where we could end up.
I guess it's that sense of childhood as well, and that loss of innocence that a lot of our texts sort of deal with.
Well, he was really angry because he was pulled out of education. He loved education. He was pulled out of education to go into the blacking factory. And after his dad was released from the debtor's prison, his mum actually wanted him to go back into the blacking factory because she needed the family was just needing the money, and I think mum was fearful that they would end up back in the same situation, and they wanted the extra income. And he never forgave his mother for that ever, that she put him back into the blacking factory for a time. And I think, you know, we forget that he was such a young boy when that happened to him. It's had a profound impact on him. You know, he's still writing about it well into his 30s, 40s.
That fear of poverty as well will never...
A real abject fear of poverty,
But I suppose that feeds well into Scrooge, because he has a fear of poverty as well.
Yeah, there is nothing.
That's why he's so miserly.
There is nothing in this world with which, I can't remember the quote, the man condemns as much as poverty, or something, or the pursuit of wealth, or something like that.
Yeah. And that golden idol as well that he replaces.
That comes at that point with the Christmas Past, isn't it? Where you know, we're seeing his descent into greed and avarice, and we're seeing that he fears poverty, and
Yeah.
that's probably Dickens, as we've been discussing, Dickens' own fear coming across.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Definitely.
He was a very complex person, was Dickens, and I think the more you read the text and the more you analyse the text, you can see how his experiences in his family, it's almost biography. Sorry, it's just so much of what he's experienced.
Yeah.
Even his relationship with Belle, he was broken-hearted because he chased this girl for ages. She promised herself to him, and she broke off the engagement, and he was absolutely heartbroken about that. And it really kind of marred his view on women for a long time, as we all know. So there's just so much of him that seeps through into the novel.
And I
you
think
do
that-
get a sense of raw emotion.
Yeah,
don't
you
Yeah.
do, absolutely.
I think that contextual, his own context, his personal context, carries on the later he goes into life. When
Absolutely.
he becomes a parliamentary reporter,
Yeah.
and he sees sort of this legislation being made and no changes being made. He sees sort of how parliamentary legislation and reports on how parliamentary legislation affects the poor and people like the Cratchit family and things like that, and wanted it to change.
Yeah.
That is literally the bottom line of this novel, isn't it? He wanted to see
And he was-
change in society.
He was hands-on about it as well. He was visiting lots of prisons, as we know. He was visiting lots of ragged schools, and he was really invested in learning more and seeing what was going on the streets. It wasn't that he was this kind of, silent protester who is, humming and ahhing about it, writing novels, but actually doesn't really have any experience of it. He was getting into the nitty-gritty of all of this, and an active participant in trying to create change, really.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting in coming around to sort of Dickens' intentions, because he wrote a lot of sort of journalistic articles on poverty, but it seems to be his novels are the most powerful way of trying to educate people and trying to force about social change.
Yeah.
So why a novel? Why use the novel? Why didn't he just write another article about poverty?
I think reach is a big one. The fact that, if he's writing parliamentary articles and reports, there's not going to be a lot of people that are going to, I don't mean not a lot of people, but it's not going to reach the widest possible audience. Whereas
Yeah.
as a popular novelist, that it's going to reach a massive
Yeah.
audience. There's going to be people rich and poor reading this over
Yeah.
and over again, and it gets that ingrained
Plus,
message.
am I not right in thinking that, I may be wrong, but wasn't A Christmas Carol serialised
Yeah,
across
it was, yeah.
newspapers?
Yeah,
It was,
So
yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
there's guaranteed future income there. As simple as that. If you publish a bit in the newspaper every week, then that's guaranteed future income.
It was a financial decision for him to release it in the way that he did, and it's because it was a financial. He was low on funds, and his publishers basically said to him, we need you to produce something quick, and that's what he came up with.
I think as well, in coming back to this idea of Dickens' intentions as well, I think when you create, let's take the Cratchit family, Tiny Tim, when you create, a character who is incredibly vulnerable and yet ridiculously grateful for what he has, which is very, very little. He's basically got a wooden crutch and, threadbare clothes and everything, and still he's, walking along going, God bless us everyone, and cough, 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 and all of this. You cannot, even the most sort of cynical in society, I guess, you cannot help but love Tiny Tim. He is ridiculously grateful. I don't think I would be quite so grateful if I was living on the brink of poverty, and I was disabled and everybody else around me was sort of rich and, getting on with life, and I was well aware that mine was limited. But he's just so positive, isn't he? He's so happy. He's so
got more
grateful.
PCH than any of us.
He certainly has. He certainly
Yeah,
The
has.
embodiment of peace.
Yeah.
It is just that it's a powerful message, isn't it? That we all think we have a hard lot, but there's always somebody out there who's far worse off than what we are, and that we always have to try and find some optimism in the worst of situations. For Tiny Tim, it's definitely religion that gets him through, which is obviously that's. I'm not saying he's cowing to his religious readership, but certainly there's going to be an element of that, because he was a very astute man. The supernatural, he was dabbling in that at the time. He was aware that there were seances taking place it was an emerging kind of field in America, so he travelled to America to sit in these seances and see what it was all about. He was interested in it, and he knew it had sell because Gothic and ghost stories were selling. He was very, very astute, and he knew what he needed to do to make money. That's a quite cynical way of looking at it, but
No, I didn't know
it's
about
the
that. That's
reality.
really interesting.
Yeah, he went to America a couple of times when he was just before he wrote A Christmas Carol, and then he went back. And as America became more of an emerging kind of large economy, etc., he kind of lost the passion for it. I think he found it becoming a bit too obtuse, he just wasn't as interested in it anymore. But certainly when he first went, and it was, you know, this emerging kind of economy, he was very interested in it, and I think there was a lot there going on that was new to him, but it lost its dazzle over time.
Yeah.
Let's just say. But yeah, he was an astute man. He was a businessman as well as a writer, but he did have a good moral, we say a good moral compass. Certainly, he was problematic. He was a very, very problematic individual.
Mr. Steele, could you hand your phone over? You can collect it from student reception at the end of the day.
You've been waiting to say that, haven't you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't dare give you my phone.
Oh dear.
Right, coming back to the Cratchit family, and I think it's, you know, it's really clever the way that that Dickens uses them, because, you know, you've got this sort of family that, you know, nobody knows from anyone, and you've got Tiny Tim again, who, for me, and, you know, a couple of my year 11s have been writing about this, like, he is the surplus population.
Yeah.
You know, when he says, you know, decrease the surplus population, get rid of those people who don't contribute to society. Well, what kind of contributions is Tiny Tim going to make to society? You know, nothing. He's a drain on the resources. If you're looking at it from a clinical perspective, from Scrooge's perspective, and yet here we get this opportunity to rehumanise that surplus population in this little tiny Tim. You know, it's like saying, oh, you can just get rid of all these people, but when you're faced with little Tiny Tim with his big eyes looking up at you and his little crutch and he's just coughing, isn't he? And you're just like, oh, bless you.
He is like an
sweetie.
embodiment of that surplus population he describes. And
And it's, I think maybe you can then link that to Dickens' intentions when it's like he's saying quite a lot of those wealthy Victorian readers who might have believed in that Malthusian theory probably wouldn't necessarily have such strong views on the surplus population if they were confronted with it themselves. And that's much like Scrooge in the story. It doesn't start to sort of really see that until he is confronted with the reality of what is facing the Cratchits and the surplus population.
And that's another reason, going back to, you know, why do we teach it? Because A Christmas Carol is a timeless story. We do this today. We beat the working class over the head. We call them chavs. We laugh at them. We all pretend we're not like them. You know, we all pretend we're not working class. But you know, society may have moved on. We might have technology. People might not be dying in the streets. But in many ways, we're, you know, people do to the working classes now what we did to the working classes back in Dickens' age.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can I just say that the we is not the English department?
Not us.
Absolutely not.
Society, those in power as well.
I think we're very much proud of our working class roots. I would say that.
I'm a proper chav,
Ravo, born and bred.
Right, so this brings us round to the stretch and challenge side of things. So what kind of things will we be expecting from students? What kind of advice can we give them to be getting those 8s and 9s out of A Christmas Carol?
I think the first thing I'd want to mention is you have to explicitly be talking about the structure of the novel and that cyclical nature of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think sometimes structurally when we're talking to our students, you know, to go track through the novel in order, obviously they get good marks on structure and things like that by going stave by stave by stave by stave. But I think you have to then talk about how in stave 5 the circle is completed.
Absolutely.
There's that complete cycle. We go for basically everyone that we meet in stave 1 and see Scrooge's attitude towards them is completely flipped on its head, almost to a unbelievable degree, really, isn't it? It's like, you know, he's so horrible to them in the first stave, and then in stave 5 he revisits them all and he's so lovely to them, you know. I think you have
No
to
wonder
talk
Bob
about the
Cratchit's
structure.
confused.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to talk about that explicitly. That word,
Yeah.
cyclical structure.
But even I mean, he throws everything at it. Even the weather as well. We go from foggy, everything's
Yeah.
foggy and dark. You know, Scrooge literally can't see what's in front of him.
Yeah.
Can't
To
see the
you know, it's
houses.
bright and jovial and
Yeah.
clear,
Yeah.
and it's like, you know, there's no fog at all, no mist, no fog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he can see, you know, the plight of society. He can see what he can do to help, and everything's lovely. So, and the similes as well. You know, we go from solitary as an oyster to as merry as a schoolboy.
Yeah.
You know, as
Yeah.
happy as an angel, that kind of thing. So you're looking at those patterns that Dickens, you know, he's not very subtle with it. But he, you know, he throws them at us to show that this man has changed,
Yeah.
and you know, everything's going to be different.
I think building on that sort of language analysis in general, I mean, obviously we do that for all of our texts, but, you know, the prose in A Christmas Carol is, you know, typically florid, I suppose, you know, like most Victorian novels. And there's just so much to dive into language analysis wise. Like you said, solitary as an oyster. Oysters, they live at the bottom of the ocean. They live in darkness. They're hard shelled and you can't crack through them. You know, they're salty. You know,
Bottom feeders.
bottom feeders. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But there is always the potential.
Of a
Pearl
pearl
inside.
inside, exactly.
Yeah.
Like how good is that?
Yeah.
You know, or like I love that description of Fezziwig as oily. Such a
Yeah.
bizarre adjective,
Yeah.
but it suggests somebody who is socially at ease, somebody who is having a great time, somebody who's relaxed.
See, I just thought spots then.
Yeah,
It wouldn't quite have had the same effect if you described him as greasy, would
No.
it?
That's what I was thinking.
But oily also suggests he's just a little bit drunk as well.
Yeah.
You know, and oily suggests he's a bit drunk. He's had a bit too much to eat. He gets on great with everyone.
Yeah.
He's just having the
It's a
time
great
of his
word.
life. It's a great word.
Absolutely.
Oily.
Absolutely.
There's so much to get into.
And I think as well, if we look at quickly at some of the minor characters, you know, the function of the minor characters. So we've got Fred, we've got the ghosts. You know, what's the purpose of these characters then?
I think Fred serves as a really important reminder that, you know, you can be cut from the same cloth, but it doesn't mean to say that you have to hold the same values. And often we see that where the family, you know, one person in a family behaves in a certain way, and that's just the, you know, or the accepted norm, and that doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah.
Fred is, you know, he's the last remaining relative of Scrooge, as far as we're aware. He has every right, realistically, to be just as angry and, you know, upset and as, you know, vicious as Scrooge is, but he isn't, and
He gets rejected every
he gets
Christmas.
rejected.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and yet he doesn't, and
There's perseverance for you.
yeah, and I think it's also, you know, that Scrooge is, I think it's really important to remember that Scrooge has been hurt by his parents, and what the difference there was that Fred knew love from his mum. We know that Fran
Yeah.
loved and
Yeah, like
cared.
he embodies the best
Yeah,
of them
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, so we know that Scrooge didn't have that love, or that it's implied because of his father, or it came too late.
Yeah.
So that's the difference, isn't it? The nurturing of children, if you nurture them, if you care for them, they can come from the same, you know, cut from the same cloth, have the same experiences, but come out of them experiences behaving very differently.
And I think, sorry, go on.
Oh no, you're right.
Building on that, Fred represents a future for Scrooge. Without Fred, when Scrooge is done yoo-hooing down the street, there'd be nobody for him.
No,
But
absolutely
because of Fred, we know that Scrooge has a family. He has somewhere to go now that he's found redemption. And so Fred
Yeah.
represents a future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He's contrasted to how Scrooge is at the beginning, isn't he?
Yeah.
There's a
An
complete
alternative.
antithesis to him, isn't
Absolutely,
there?
where Scrooge is, you know, his cheeks are grey and, you know, pinched. Fred comes in the same
His
scene,
eyes
and
sparkle,
his eyes are
yeah.
sparkling,
He's
his
glowing,
cheeks are
yeah.
glowing, and you know, he's just.
And if we're talking about other minor characters, Belle, you know, I think she reveals to us that Scrooge has a capacity for warmth and love.
Yeah.
You know, beyond the sort of love he expressed towards his dead sister, you know, Belle shows that he has a capacity for, you know, deep human connection.
Yeah. I think, like Fezziwig as well, you know, we think about how he's then set up as the model for Scrooge, and we know that Scrooge was treated nicely, and he knows what a good... And it's, I think that also sets up, it makes us feel a lot worse about him at the beginning when we meet
Yes.
Fezziwig and we're like, well, hang on, you know what it's like to be a good employer.
You know
You've
the power of
experienced
that.
warmth
Yeah.
and exactly what it is
Yeah.
to have a nice relationship with your employer. And then, so why are you treating Bob Cratchit like you are? I think
Yeah.
it's really powerful to
Sometimes-
see Fezziwig at that point.
We have to then, obviously, because we know that, all right, he had a poor start in life, but things did improve. He had a really good boss. He had a person, a fiance who loved him. So, in that respect, it's what's come what's come while he was an adult that's affected him more than what actually happened in his childhood.
Yeah.
And that's probably Dickens' criticism of the Industrial Revolution and what's happening. But it's really interesting, isn't it, how we all kind of hinge it all on his childhood, when actually he seemed to have recovered from his childhood somewhat as a young
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
I think he just needed a cat, or 2 or 3, and unconditional
Yeah, but they'd
love.
just been feeding them on gruel, and that's not nice.
No, I think he would have to be generous, because nobody, when you've got those little furry, purring little darlings just looking up at you, I don't think anybody can resist them. That's how I see Tiny Tim anyway, as almost like a little kitten, sort of
Yeah, yeah.
in need. So I'm going to throw out a question that I haven't prepared, but it's something that I ask year 11. So, which ghost do you think has had the biggest impact, or has the biggest impact on Scrooge? Which do you think is that key sort of
Ghost
change?
of Christmas Yet to Come for me.
Right. Why is
Go
that?
Just because of his abject horror in the final few scenes. Mr. Steele's
No.
grinning.
I'm hoping I can see where this conversation's going.
We'll come back to this later.
Yeah.
But the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. I just think that ghost is. It absolutely floors Scrooge.
Yeah.
Scrooge is everything he sees disturbs him, but he's absolutely floored at the end. He's on his knees, he's begging, he's screaming, he's that last ghost. It's so dark.
And also, I think it's ironic that more people mourn the loss of Tiny Tim, a little scrap of a child who is nothing. As far as Scrooge is concerned, and yet nobody cares that he's dead, apart from the people that can steal clothes off him, like the fact that she nicks the
Or that are
shirt off
relieved
his
of his
back.
death.
Actually, sure.
Yeah.
I love that.
I think the sort of grim irony that Scrooge doesn't recognise that he's a dead man. He doesn't recognise that they're talking.
I think he
literally
does.
every-
He recognises on some
doesn't
level.
want to.
but
I think
on some level,
subconsciously
Denial.
but he
Yeah.
plays
Denial.
dumb, doesn't he? They're talking about him at the stock exchange. They're ripping apart his house. But,
Yeah.
but
I wonder who this rich man
Who's-
could be.
Possibly.
Whose sugar tongs are these?
if you don't recognise your own curtains, mate,
it reminds me,
you're living in the dark.
Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, when he
Yeah.
he reverts to that sort of infantile
Yeah.
mentality.
Yeah.
He's like that.
Definitely a defence
But
mechanism.
No,
Yeah.
sir, they're saying boo earns.
I was saying who earns. Excellent.
So, Mr. Steele, then. So, would you agree?
Well, I do agree with Miss Bruff. However, I'm hoping that Miss Dodd's going to take my lead on this and then change her answer if it's the same as mine, because I think it's the Ghost of Christmas Present. I think by being shown the reality of what Christmas is, not only what Christmas is for a lot of people, including the Cratchits, being shown the reality of what he's caused in the Cratchit household, caused a big change for him, and then being presented with ignorance and want at the end of that stave, and being shown that look, this is what attitudes like yours have caused these two children, and this is what's going to cause the doom of society.
Yeah.
And then to be presented with his own words, have they no refuge? Are there no prisons? I think that's such a key moment
It
for him.
is
And
a
I would
massive-
say
yeah.
him being taken on that journey around
Yeah.
London and seeing not only the Cratchits' Christmas, but then how Christmas is supposed to be presented
and
and
even
celebrated.
around the world almost, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
the
been
ship,
taken
the
out,
lighthouse, the mine, and they're all having a great Christmas.
Yeah,
and
and
he's just
everyone
this
is.
sad little man. What a sad little
Yeah.
life, Scrooge.
Yeah.
Sat on your own.
Do you know what? I think it sounds all right to me. Sorry, let's just sit with the book and
I have always, up until recently, thought it was the Ghost of Christmas Present for the same reasons as yourself, Mr. Steele. However, I actually, I don't know why, but I had a moment where I was just thinking about this. recently, and I actually thought it was the Ghost of Christmas Past, and not because it shows his past. Do you know why?
No, I'm grateful of the fact that the moment that you changed your mind was then when you realised that we'd all cover one of the ghosts.
No,
It's almost as if this has been organised.
It's almost like, no, this is a bit of a curveball, but I love to throw a curveball. And I do think it's nothing to do with the fact that it shows him his past. I think it's because it's at that moment that Scrooge realises that Jacob Marley was real. Because up until that point, he doesn't buy into it, he doesn't believe it. And if Jacob Marley had come along and told him, you need to change, and then nothing else had have happened, he wouldn't have bought into it.
It's just a bit of beef, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Undigested
But the
bit of
moment
beef.
that second ghost comes and starts to show him all of this and he buys into it, he realises that Jacob's message was actually true.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's the moment, and the rest of it is just him opening
In
up.
fact, you've just reminded me of possibly the best quote in the play, the one where he...
Play.
In the
Mr. Gruff.
Sorry.
In the novella.
In the novella.
It's been a long week.
It's been a very long week, yeah. Where he compares Jacob Marley's ghosts to gravy.
Yeah.
What does he say? There's more
There's
more
grave
gravy
of
than
you.
grave about
I
you.
love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What a
That little
zinger!
joke.
What
Yeah.
a comeback!
I
Can
think-
you beat that? No.
I think you're right as well, Miss Dodd, in the fact that we still see, even towards the end of The Ghost of Christmas Past, he's still very resistant
He's
to this idea.
resistant.
He's like, haunt me no longer, I don't want to see any of this. So he's still on that brink of, oh God, Jacob Marley was right, but I still don't want to believe it. He's still got much more to go on that journey.
Yeah.
He tries to put the extinguisher cap as well, and if you're
Yeah.
saying that the light from the Ghost of Christmas Past represents hope, that change, that he's trying to squish it, isn't he? But he can't, because the light sort of forces its way out, not
yeah.
into space as it does in
No,
the cartoon version.
no.
But and we get this wonderful quote as well. He said, I've learned a lesson that is working now. He says that to the second ghost. So already he recognises that that he is changing. So,
But you see, I'm going to be contrarian just for a moment here before we wrap up. But for me, there's a moment of sort of levity at the end of the Christmas Past sequence when he tries to extinguish it. There's almost like a childlike weirdness to that moment for me that doesn't.
tantrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just has a little
Cannot hide
tantrum
the
and says,
light.
Yeah.
You know
as he
what?
forces
Shut
it
up!
down.
I'm
I
done
don't
with
wanna
you.
change
But,
it.
but for me, if we're talking about impact, it's like the whole of the novel. He's been sort of a horse led to water, and at the end of the novel, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is sort of dunking its head in the river, making it drink.
Yeah, like, you are
You know?
going to die, sort your life
Yeah,
out.
I feel if the ghost had stopped after the second ghost, then there are 3 ghosts, right? Yeah, after
Yeah.
the second
Well,
ghost.
four if you
Four
include
including-
Marley.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, after the second of the major ghosts, I don't think he would have changed. I think he'd have just gone, oh, that was a weird dream.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's exactly
There's
why.
that whole
for me, it was
argument,
the
isn't
final
there?
ghost that seals the deal.
Right.
There's that whole argument that's been presented that actually, if we were to write the sequel to A Christmas Carol, Scrooge would revert back to the way he was, because as you put distance between him and the reality of the ghost, he'll soon start to think of it as a dream, and soon start to realise that actually, he's got a money lending business. He's not going to make much money if he's giving it away to people, is he?
No.
So in order to sort of maintain himself, he's going to have to go back to an element of how he was.
It's what we go on.
Yeah, sorry, if we go back to context though, what Dickens is doing there is so very, very clever, because Dickens was well aware that people were almost hypocritical. We were living in a time of the empire and colonialism, where you had on the one hand somebody who was criticising slavery and criticising the industry and the capitalism and the way that things were going at the time. Not capitalism, sorry, but the industry and the way things were going at the time. And on the other hand, every single person in society was benefiting from it. Every single person.
Yeah, we like to criticise
We
things.
they were all benefiting from it in much the same way that at the end of the day, there's no such thing as an ethical moneylender, but they've got a place in society still.
Yeah.
And he was very much aware of that.
Yeah.
Right, well, there's more episodes that we could do, just on the ghost alone. Just
We'll do
on
the sequel
context.
next
We
week.
can do Are we going
Christmas
to do
Carol
a
2.
dramatic reading of Christmas Carol the sequel?
I'd like
Yep.
to.
With,
I think we.
and Inspector Calls the sequel.
I'd like to revisit the Inspector Calls, because I've been looking recently at shadow people in an Inspector Calls, and the very lesser characters and how they almost have like a subtext. Now I think that's a really interesting.
Is this like a
Interesting, 'cause people
conspiracy
always-
theory?
No.
People always ask about Edna, don't they?
You know, it's Alderman Meggerty, Edna, and
Big Joe Meggerty.
yeah,
Fat carcass.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting to go back and have a look at some of
Now
those
I can
characters
hate
that
on
are
Gerald a bit more.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, that'll have to
Yeah.
wait until we've done one podcast per every 18 poem.
Oh, I'm to poetry soon.
Yeah.
Bagsy not to autumn.
I'll do to autumn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to have to just
we have to
wrap it
wrap
up.
it,
So, word of the week, I'm going to get Mr. Steele to pronounce this because he knows more about it than I
Thank
do.
you very much, Miss Owens, for dropping that on me. So the word of the week that we've got this week actually comes from Portuguese, and it allows me to flex my rather considerable musical muscles because it is a term that comes from the Portuguese musical tradition. Now, I do believe the English pronunciation is saudade. In Portuguese, it's pronounced saudade. And it is a deep emotional state of melancholic longing for a person or thing that is absent. Now, in Portuguese sort of musical terms, it does specifically refer to like a piece of music or poetry that is about that subject. So you think about your typical love songs or love poetry that's about unrequited love. That would be classed in Portuguese as a saudade. It's a lovely word. It's brilliant. And I think Miss Owens wanted to choose this word of the week this week as a shout out to our dear departed Mr. Pinnans.
Yeah, he's not dead.
He's not dead, but is no longer a part of the English department, and we miss him dearly. And Miss Grice, who has just left last week, and we're
we miss.
very, very sad that we've no longer got them working with us.
Yeah, we might have to ask them to come and do a cameo appearance.
That
on
would
one
be
of the,
amazing. We've
That'll-
lost
yeah,
two.
get them in
we
by
have
podcasts as
two
well.
absolutely fantastic members of the English
But
department.
their Year 11 classes are in fantastic hands at this moment in time.
Yeah,
so-
speaking of Year 11 as well, just a shout out to one of my Year 11s it's her 16th birthday today, so
Oh, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Right, so we'll join you again next week when we'll be looking at the mammoth task of working our way through all 18 poems.
Yeah, I don't think we even know how we're going to approach the poetry yet,
Yeah.
do we? So,
Thematically, let's go thematically.
but yeah.
Okay, right, thank you very much for listening and have a lovely weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.